On this week's Mailbag Monday, the San Diego Padres rumors are starting up. We're talking about a bunch of different players, including Jurickson Profar, who reportedly may not be returning to the Padres, the Roki Sasaki Sweepstakes, and of course, answering some of your questions, because it is the mailbag after all. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres Podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Monday, November 11th. As always, I'm your host with sometimes occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can check me out on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiipeno, or the show account at LO_Padres. You can also check out my baseball-related work over at Just Baseball, where I write about the Padres, general baseball stuff. Going to be doing that, especially because it's going to be a long offseason. And then also check out my podcast, my other one, Baseball versus the World, which will be ramping up soon. And I'll talk to you about it maybe in the intro in a future episode to let you know when it's officially back. But today's episode, guys, we are talking about a couple of big, I think, new developments for the Padres. I think a couple of major developments. Two crucial players, and that is Roki Sasaki and Jurickson Profar, and kind of just the latest info, the rumblings and whatnot that we've heard about them, starting with Profar. And then we'll get into some of your guys' questions. You didn't send me too many this week, but even still, as always, I answer them all. So before we get into that, guys, though, let me just tell you that today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your purchase. Now, let me tell you guys. Again, I know I've been inconsistent with posting. I've been really sick in a bunch of different ways. It's been bad, but now we're cooking with gas, everybody. We are back. And I want to say, we've had a lot of different news reports, and I think that what's going to be interesting, I really do think that over the next few weeks, they are going to be interesting. At the very minimum, we'll get at least little updates and reports that will give us a reason to talk about Padres, and whether or not the stove is indeed going to be hot. So I'm very excited for that. But I will say that there's this real, I'm getting just personally, before we get into it, a little bit of an uneasy feeling about the Padres and free agency. And I'm only saying that because I'm wondering, it's not a guarantee that the team goes out and goes nuts. Every offseason, every trade deadline, with the exception of heading into the 2022 season, the offseason heading into 2022 season, the Padres have always done at least something. Even last year, when they didn't add necessarily too much, they did do the Juan Soto trade, which ended up being really effective and good for them. So that's fine. But I think that I don't know. This could be just a layover of my feelings that the Padres really had it this year, and it feels like everything kind of went their way, with the exception of obviously how the playoffs went, that I'm just a little bit worried that did they miss a little bit of their chance, and is next year going to be a little bit of a step back? Well, for one thing, we're wondering if Jurickson Profar is going to be one of those pieces that the Padres take a step back in. According to a bunch of reports that we've been seeing, is that Jurickson Profar is unlikely, according to industry sources, to re-sign with the Padres, which is makes me very, very sad. Now, here's the thing. There's been a couple of reports. First of all, it's funny, as I started recording this podcast, there was a little bit of a prediction by Bleacher Report, specifically our guy, not our guy literally, but it was from Tim Kelly of Bleacher Report, predicted that he will end up signing with the Padres, 2 years, $34 million, and then he thinks a $17 million club option for 2077. So again, the rumors are flying all over the place, but I will say that, as reported last week, there were some vibes for some more non-prediction people who were just reporting that said that it seems like Profar would depart. Now, there's a couple things about this. Should they re-sign him? In my opinion, it's a tough question. I really do, because I do think that it depends on exactly what the Padres are working with. What do they have? They're expected to have a $200 million payroll, and then $250 luxury tax and all that stuff. So, or $240 luxury tax, I think it is. So a player like Jurickson Profar would be someone you can bring back and hopefully do really well. He was the starting all-star in left field this year. Like, let's not forget that. And he wouldn't cost or have as much of a long-term commitment as some other players. I know everybody's been bringing up Anthony Santander. I like him, but he's a little bit more of a right fielder. Even so, you move everybody around. Santander might get a little bit more of a payday. I will say that with Santander, and as again, this is just a really quick tangent, that he was, despite the fact that he hit for an absolute megaton of power last year, specifically, what did he have, 44 bombs, he produced a 3.3 wins above replacement. And for a guy who's entering 30, I'm just a little bit, I don't know, that those are the type of players that in my lifetime tend to fall off, i.e. he's going to hit 29 home runs next year and his overall slash line won't be as great and the defensive value won't be great. So you'll be like, okay, this is a good player, but how much was he worth it? So I don't know exactly what Santander is going to get, but he is the type of player that I worry a little bit about in the long term, depending on what deal he gets. But anyway, with Profar, a lot of people will bring up that he's only a season removed, aside from 2024, from being one of the worst, if not the worst players in all of baseball. Minus 1.6 wins above replacement. He was atrocious defensively, couldn't hit, and that was in Colorado. Some people have made the comparison, myself included, is this the new Cody Bellinger type of free agent? A guy who, had been up and down, and then it looks like he figures it out, but the stats say, hey, no way, he performed above his head, and the next year he didn't. That's exactly the reason why Cody Bellinger opted into his contract recently with the Cubs, because he knows there ain't a big market out there for him, and that the Cubs probably overpaid on that one. But I will say that when it comes to Profar and kind of the peripheral stats, I don't necessarily think that this is a Cody Bellinger thing. I do think the defense is real. I do not think he's a very good free agent, but a 139 WRC plus, his weighted on base was 365, his expected weighted on base was 364. Bellinger had like a 50-point discrepancy in like everything. He was not hitting the ball necessarily hard, so it did suggest that he did get really lucky. And Profar did change his swinging mechanics. He was, a little bit more of a leg kick. He was striding into the ball a lot more, and I just think that there's part of him that is very, very legit, right? And I do think that the defense is a problem, which is one of the reasons I'd be hesitant about him. But overall, this guy's been such a good vibe for the Padres clubhouse. And it's funny that when you bring up, some people will say, well, he did kind of tail off in the second half. He still had a 794 OPS in the second half. So yes, he did tail off. That's true, but that's still a quality bat. So I don't think that what Jurickson Profar did this past season isn't going to be replicated. I think that he can do a certain amount of it. It wouldn't surprise me if next year, let's say he's a 125 WRC plus guy and a 3 wins above replacement guy. I could see that because remember, he was obscenely good in the clutch. And I don't think that translates year to year. You're not going to have the type of season he had with runners on base in the clutch situations, and that definitely contributes to your overall wins above replacement mark. I don't think that that's going to, not a ton, but I don't think that that's going to, that's not something that you can rely on again. I love it, don't get me wrong, but for you to have in high leverage situations a 327 WRC plus versus a 125 in low, 115 in medium, according to Fangraphs, that to me suggests there will be a little bit of a come down. But I think that the skills are still there. And I still think he could be an average, decent run producer. But I will say, be very, very wary of that. Because while he was a vibe and I adore him, I don't know necessarily if he can replicate it all that way. But I do think that the skill is there. Unlike a Bellinger who was super clutch. And I don't think that it was necessarily there. I think that he overperformed given his metrics. So I would still like Profar, and I like that deal. 3 years, or what was it, 2 years, an option for 2027. So if it does turn out to be super legit, and this is the beginning, and we're seeing one of the more unprecedented turnarounds of a career, that's pretty good. And it's not going to cost nearly as much as some other players might be going for this offseason, right? So I like it. And also, I do think there's something to be said for club chemistry. They clearly love him and they ride for him. So I like to see him be brought back, although the early, rumors makes me sad. I'm really nervous about it. And it makes me scared, man. I really hope that they bring him back. I'm not opposed to your Anthony Santander in right field. You move Tatis, you move Marijuana, whatever it is, or maybe you move Santander left field. I'm not opposed to that, but I don't know. It's just Profar's our guy. So I'm really hoping that they keep him. But even still, I don't think that Profar is the biggest story for the Padres offseason. I think that there is one player who will dictate not just the future of the Padres, but the future of baseball. and that's one Sir Roki Sasaki. And I'm going to explain why, guys, in just a minute. First, we got to take a break and talk about one of our sponsors, and it is one of our longtime sponsors, guys. That is the good folks over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel America's number one sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5, just $5, and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place, folks. And they also got you with some other stuff. If you got a hunch, on the latest game stats, you can view the flag play-by-play, but other stuff too. They got hockey, they got NBA, you know what I'm saying? They got all sorts of stuff on there. So go check it out, guys. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. And let me tell you, if speaking of NFL, you got not Marlins, the Dolphins and the Rams tonight. I got Cooper Kupp in fantasy, so I'm hoping for him. And I think it's pretty much a guarantee that he's going to get a lot of targets. So I'm just throwing it out there. You know what I mean? Just throwing it out there for you guys. But most importantly, guys, go check it out. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And just like that, everybody, we are back thriving and vibing into segment number 2 of the show. Hopefully you guys are all enjoying. Please follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiipeno, and leave any comments on the YouTube, and you may very well make the mailbag segment, which we'll get into in a little bit. But first, let's talk about Roki Sasaki. For those who don't know, this is the new Japanese phenom out of Japan, who is only 23 years old, and the buzz around him and why he's so fascinating is because under MLB rules, international free agents are considered like at the amateur level. Under 25, they're considered they're considered to be in the amateur level, which basically means that it's kind of open season on this guy, and that a lot of teams have the chance. Unfortunately, the Dodgers are one of the favorites, which is why I was saying in the previous segment, I think that this is big not just for the Padres, but all of baseball. There's a possibility that the Dodgers go out and they sign Jack Flaherty, they bring him back, that they get Shohei Ohtani back next year as a pitcher, that they get Tyler Glasnow at some point next year. They still have Yamamoto, right? And then they also bring in Roki Sasaki at 23 years old, which is the same kind of, this low contract situation is the same kind of situation that Shohei Ohtani saw with the Angels. This could be a disaster, in my opinion, for baseball. I genuinely believe that. I'm going to talk more about that tomorrow. I don't want to get into my rants too much today. But the Padres are in a position where Roki Sasaki is not just someone that I want. I think it's someone that they need, like desperately, desperately need. And there's some reason to believe that they can have him. Again, money does not appear to be a key detriment, right? Reading from The Athletic, Sasaki essentially will become available to all 30 teams if he is posted after December 1st, which is what is being reported, by the way. Yet, despite being the number 3 ranked player on The Athletic's top 40 MLB free agent big board, Sasaki still would be limited to signing a minor league deal. The Los Angeles Dodgers are heavy favorites, but let's talk about the Padres. Yu Darvish, ladies and gentlemen, is he the key? Reading from that same Athletic article, which was by Dennis Lin, I recommend everyone check it out. It's a nice all-encompassing, gives you the meat and the meat and eats or whatever of the whole thing. In quotes, Sasaki's representation is expected to include Darvish's longtime agent, Joel Wolfe, who publicly praised Preller just recently for his handling of Darvish's situation. For those who don't remember, Yu Darvish went on the restriction list for a private matter that he was attending to. They gave him all the time he needed, came back, and was great, and he was just praised for that. Given the sometimes adversarial world of GM-agent relationships, the gesture was not typical. This written from Dennis Lin. And it's also true. This isn't just Dennis Lin hyping up the Padres. If there's one thing about AJ Preller, he doesn't have an anti-player slant. Is he have a bad ability to make sure they hire the right people and get the best out of their talent, and maybe he micromanages too much? That is a fair criticism. But when it comes to the team itself, this is a guy they're handing out contracts, and yes, maybe you had the Xander Bogaerts situation where you didn't exactly tell him he was going to be playing second until like 2 weeks, until spring training. I get that. But when it comes to just being pro player, they've been doing that. They've been going out and trading for a bunch of players. They've been scouting the best players. And most importantly, they've never had like an arbitration really dispute of any of their major players. That means something. And I hope that it means that it's a goodwill gesture that will work in favor of the Padres, because this is one of those things where it's rare, I think Major League Baseball gets like this, but this feels like a free agent where it's not just going to be purely only the money, right? Like that's going to be a big part, don't get me wrong. And I imagine that given the Padres' financial constraints going forward in the future, potentially, because it's not like this money's coming off the books, maybe that's something Roki Sasaki will be looking into. But even if that were to be the case, worry about that in 4 or 5 years, right? Like you could get Sasaki now, maybe he leaves in free agency later, but that would be huge because the Padres, with their payroll structure, Darvish, 38, he's going to see his salary rise to $20 million next season. In 2027, Machado's compensation will jump into $35 million per year, while Tatis will increase to $25 million, right? And not to mention, you've still got the Bogart situation, the Jay Cronenworth situation. Signing Sasaki would give them stability and flexibility in the markets going forward, considering they obviously have to replace Joe Musgrove, and their pitching depth beyond this year is a little bit questionable, right? You still have the Michael King and Dylan Cease. They're free agents after this next year. So that is a big thing. So for Preller and the Padres, as they've said in the article, watching Sasaki go to their Dodgers and their already unrivaled resources would be a crushing development both next year and for years to come. And I agree, ladies and gentlemen, I agree. I think Roki Sasaki, I just think that this is it. If they were to get him, you get this young, controllable pitcher who's not going to hurt your payroll. And again, here's the thing. I just want to take one little victory lap. Let me just do it real quick. Just a little bit, guys. This is why for years I've been talking about on this show why you can't just necessarily spend on best available every year. You know what I mean? I thought people they would see that, given the fact that everybody wanted Castellanos and then Soto ends up becoming available. Everyone wants certain signings to happen, whether it be Blake Snell, who I've tweeted about. And again, I love him. I think it'd be so much fun if he came back, but Sasaki should be the priority because of how much money they're already spending. And I'm hoping that the Darvish thing means something. I'm hoping, and the article doesn't point this out, that AJ Preller from not too long ago, he name dropped Roki Sasaki during one of his press conferences. I believe it it might have been the Peter Seidler thing, the memorial in memory of Peter Seidler conference, speech that he gave. I believe it might have been during that. Feel free to leave a comment if I'm wrong about that. He dropped him by name, so I'm hoping that Preller has been a super ahead of the game, which he usually is when it comes to scouting young players. I'm not saying Roki is, some super diamond in the rough. Everybody knows about him. Everybody's known about him since the World Baseball Classic, by the way. But I am hoping with all my heart that all these little breadcrumbs with the Darvish situation, with Joel Wolf, that comment, that this might be a sign that he might go to the Padres instead. Maybe you can appeal to his competitive instincts and say, do you really want to go to the super team Avengers that already just won a World Series? Come to us. We're so much more lit than them. Everybody likes us more than them, except for the media when they try to turn them into a villain. Like, go with that, right? Use whatever it takes. I just think that this is the perfect thing, because if you go out and sign Blake Snell, I'm not saying you can't recover from that, but it's going to cost them, right? The average annual value pulled per year might be like 30 to 35 million for him, especially given how good he's been, especially given the Cy Young, especially given the second half that he had with the Giants. He basically was business as usual. He needs a ramp up time, and when he's on, he's on. So that's the question. If you get Sasaki, that gives you so much flexibility, and it gives you essentially, in your own way, like a prospect almost. You know what I mean? Like, he hasn't pitched super much throughout his young career. That's because he's young, but I think he's going to be available and be really good immediately. And don't get me wrong, we're going to do more episodes on him in the future, talk about why specifically on the macro level he's so good. But to me, I look at this and I say, man, it feels like Roki no matter what, man. And I'm hoping, third piece, they traded their pitching prospects. I am hoping beyond God that it means that Preller felt really good about getting some controllable pitching for the foreseeable future, because losing Snelling to the Marlins, it seems like they're getting good development over there, and losing Lesko, I'm not necessarily saying these guys would have been, aces and all that, but I have to hope that he has some plans for the future, name dropping him, trading away your young pitching prospects, and the fact that the Yu Darvish and Joel Wolf thing, I'm hoping that they can get him. It would be the ultimate victory. At the very minimum, let's just hope that he doesn't go to the Dodgers, because if that happens and they bring back Flaherty and then maybe bring back Teoscar Hernandez and bring back a bunch of free agents, it starts to get really scary for the rest of the league in terms of just why is it that no fun players can go to other teams except for like 4 of them, right? So we'll see. I'm nervous though, man, but I'm hoping that Preller has a plan. And given how successful they were this year, given how successful they were for years now at attracting free agents, I'm hoping that they can do this, man. But I'd be lying to you if I said that I was confident in it, because I don't know. I think that the fact that the Dodgers are rumored to be favorites is extremely concerning for not just the Padres, but for the rest of the league in baseball. That even when a young star who won't cost as much, that it's still the Dodgers that gets them. That is a brutal, brutal blow to baseball. But folks, enough about Roki Sasaki. Let's get into some of your mailbag questions. Very excited to answer some of these as always. But before we get into that, let's just take a second to talk about another one of our sponsors, and that is our longtime friends over at GameTime, ladies and gentlemen. And here's the thing. You want to watch basketball live, for example? You know how fun it is to watch a game? The sounds from the court, the feel of the crowd, the chants that happen. Maybe you're going to MSG, maybe you're in Jersey, metropolitan area like me. You want to go to MSG and see the celebrity spottings, whatever you want. GameTime is here to help you get all the tickets for all the events, concerts, comedy shows, not just sports as well. They've got you covered, guys. GameTime has a new feature called GameTime Picks that makes getting tickets easier to see your favorite teams play live. GameTime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. They've got different super deals going on. They've got all sorts of, little mini features, like they show you where the seats, what it looks like from your seats. If you're a visual learner like myself, curated deals. They've got lowest prices guaranteed, event cancellation protection. They have flash deals that pop up on now and then. So if you just figured out you're going to be free and you want to go watch the Rockets versus the Knicks or whatever in MSG, they've got you covered for that, guys. So go check it out. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download GameTime today. What time is it? It's game time. And just like that, everybody, we are back thriving and vibing into the final segment of this podcast, the Mailbag segment. Thank you for everybody for sending in your questions. Remember, I usually put out a last notice like late Sunday night, and then I look at it and answer in the morning, more or less, just because I be getting tired on Sunday these days. But some of you guys sent in your questions, so I'm more than happy to answer them. And I also take a look at the YouTube just because it's entertaining sometimes. Sometimes there's genuine questions there, and sometimes just dumb stuff. But let's start with some of the genuine questions this time, guys. First of all, this one coming from @Ed Helensky on Twitter. Who's staying, who's going, and who's on the realistic free agency wish list for the Padres? Well, the latter part of that conversation, or I'm sorry, that question, I do think is what we talked about a little bit today. I think that a Jurickson Profar type of player, I think that your Roki Sasaki is kind of like the dream scenarios for this team. I will say that there's definitely other free agents out there. Don't get me wrong. You've got players, in the relief pitching market, if they want to go out and sign some of them, right? You're going to have players like that. Not exciting players. We're going to talk about like under the radar free agents as we get deeper into the offseason. But in terms of who's staying and who's going, first of all, a lot is going to be the same for the Padres next year in terms of their roster, because they have so many contracts given out. You still have Tatis, you still have Bogarts, you still have Machado, you still have Jake Cronenworth, you're still going to have Yu Darvish, you're still going to have Dylan Cease and Michael King, and in some good news in terms of the bullpen, you're still going to have Robert Suarez, you're going to have Brian Hoeing, guys like that, right? There's still going to be a lot of really good players on this team. There's still a contending team, so don't have any fear there. But in terms of who's going, the biggest players going potentially outwards are Jurickson Profar, Ha-Seong Kim, and Tanner Scott. I think that the latter two, Kim and Scott, are pretty much guaranteed to be gone, because I just don't think that Tanner Scott is a guy that the Padres can afford to spend on right now. They've already got a premium reliever that they spent on in Robert Suarez, and you can hope that the rest of the bullpen additions, from Hoeing to some of their minor league guys like Alec Jacob, guys who came up like Jeremiah Estrada, even a Sean Reynolds, maybe he can turn into something. You've got Jeremiah Estrada, you've got Robert Suarez, you've got some decent players there. So it wouldn't make sense to spend what is going to be a little bit of a tight budget on another reliever. That just wouldn't make any sense to me. So I think he's gone. And Ha-Seong Kim, same thing, especially considering that, well, they have a shortstop right now in Xander Bogaerts. And frankly, I think that Kim is a utility sort of player, and I've said before that utility players like Kim are not guys that I like extending long term. That being said, I think the bigger reason for why he's gone is just that there are other teams who need him more than the Padres, right? I just mentioned that they got Bogarts at short. Don't get me wrong. Yes, would I rather live in the universe where the Padres maybe never signed Bogarts and instead they just have Kim on like a 5-year deal at this point? Yeah, I think that would be really cool. You know what I mean? I would be really excited about that because Xander Bogaerts looks like he might be just the new Hosmer, only in terms of on-field ability. Don't get me wrong. There were a lot of other reasons why we could have said Eric Hosmer, but that's the thing there. Everyone's predicting the San Francisco Giants. It was rumored for a while. They say they're interested. It's kind of the player they've been desperately needing for a long time. So that's where I think he's going. And then Jurickson Profar, we talked about in the first segment. So that's in terms of who's leaving and who's going. There's still a lot of free agents out there, man. Like a lot. I think that there's definitely going to be, again, and I talked about this last year. One of the reasons why I wasn't wild on the Padres spending too much last year is that there's so much like really interesting free agents. Like Christian Walker, according to The Athletic, is like the 15th best free agent available. You know what I mean? Like that's pretty nuts. Tyler O'Neill is the 22nd best free agent available, and he's an outfield sort of player that I think that you can get. 3 years, $45 million is his projection. That's a pretty good player there. Walker Buehler, who I don't think is an option for the Padres necessarily, even though he would be great, but 2 years, $32 million, maybe a little bit of player, like kind of a prove it sort of year for him. I think that would be great, and I think he definitely raised his stock in the postseason because at least you saw the best version of him back. And then you've got not reclamation, but you've got like players that could have better years, like your Paul Goldschmidts, Christian Walker, like I just mentioned, Michael Conforto, who I've been believing in for way too long. I've been believing in this guy for way too long, and he's not going to get anything. So if the Padres can't get Profar, maybe you get Michael Conforto for nothing, 1 year, $10 million, something like that. That's according to The Athletic. Like, there's definitely a lot of interesting free agents heading into this offseason that are going to be really, really exciting, with the top ones being your Sotos, obviously, Corbin Burns, Roki Sasaki, Max Fried, Blake Snell, Willie Adames, Alex Bregman, Pete Alonso, Santander, Flaherty, Teoscar Hernandez, Sean Manaea. Remember him? Yeah, he's actually all of a sudden, everybody's excited about him again. He shaved the hair and all of a sudden became a reliable postseason pitcher. Really wild, right? Nate Eovaldi is out there. So there's a lot of free agents this year, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see. And I'm just hoping to God that the Padres can luck out and get Roki Sasaki. The Athletic article by Dennis Lin is great, talking about the relationship. I'm just hoping that these tea leaves come together, but that's in terms of just right now. But thank you, my good man, Ed Holinsky, for sending in the question. Next one comes from the always legendary Rama Murdy, who says, do you see baseball ever having a salary cap like the NFL and NBA have? Should the Padres let Tanner Scott walk and use internal arms to replace him? And what do we do about Profar, and should we find another outfielder instead of him? So, not gonna lie, jumped on your question a little bit, man. Basically, the first segment of this podcast on Profar was basically answered that. But in terms of Tanner Scott, what I just said now, yes, I think they should let him walk. I just think that he's going to go for a decent amount of money, specifically in terms of what The Athletic predicts for him. He's expected to get a deal of 4 years, 64. That's just like, do we really want to have two highly paid relievers? I mean, I like it. They're good. They're good players. It would be good. But what have I said? How many times have I said I don't like investing long-term in relievers because they're too volatile? So I don't want to have so much money of the Padres' salary going to two relievers, right? And we know that relievers can get bad. So imagine the world in which Suarez declines and Tanner Scott declines. All of a sudden, that's how much money you spent on guys instead of, say, I don't know, like a decent free agent that won't hamstring you for too much longer. So I'm against that. In terms of the salary cap, I don't know. I feel like if it was ever going to happen, it would have happened a long time ago. I don't have necessarily the most evidence in the world to prove this, but to me, I think this is one of those things where the Padres just kind of, or not the Padres, Major League Baseball just didn't adjust in time. I think they should have, in the early 2000s especially, addressed and figured out how to realign the arbitration system to not be so much against players, to create an environment that didn't make it that guys were getting 10-year deals and guys were getting 15-year deals. It makes free agency a lot more like, I don't know. It's just, and don't get me wrong, there's more players in baseball, so you're always going to have some guys to look forward to in free agency, but the more activity and the more movement, that's something that people like about the NBA. The fact that you don't know if your stars are going to stay. Some people like it, some people don't, but I think it does create at least intrigue and drama for you to follow, and the rumor mill and all that stuff. So I do think that's part of it. But I just think in general, you can't even get these teams to spend a little bit that aren't spending already. So getting them to have a salary cap, I think is just not going to happen. I think a salary floor would be something that's really good, but I just don't see it for a variety of reasons that, frankly, I think deserves its own podcast episode. And I think we might save that for another one, but still a great question, sir. I just don't see it. I'm sorry. I don't see it happening. I just think that teams are too greedy and baseball is just not proactive enough. I mean, just look at the league, man. Look at the league and look at the decisions that they've made. They just refuse to kind of address their biggest issues. In terms of some comments that we got on the YouTube, some troll comments. At Super Cruise said, magical season, LOL. Y'all can hold this L with both hands. And at Glowster2323, just skip everything that happened in the season and skip to the final out of the postseason. LOL, that's all that anyone will even remember. LMAO, in all caps, referring to Tatis. First of all, that's hilarious. It is true that everybody's going to remember the team, how it ended. Fernando Tatis Jr. literally had like a 2,000 OPS in the playoffs. So I'm pretty sure they're not going to remember the one time he grounded out. You know, that's absurd and that's just dumb and you're whack and get off my channel, frankly, right? Like, give me a break. Give me a break. Nobody in the postseason this year was as good as Tatis, right? With the exception of Stanton. Stanton was pretty good, right? And other players had big moments, don't get me wrong, but Tatis was just a nuclear missile in the postseason this year. So that's absurd. And in terms of the other comment, magical season, it was a magical season for them to have all these comebacks, for them to have some players that are really exciting from your Donovan Solano just to be picked up after nobody believed in him for whatever reason, for you to have the Juan Soto trade actually fit your favor, to have a total reversal in your one-run games, in your extra inning games, all the walk-off moments, Dylan Cease throwing a no-hitter, Kyle Higashioka having his best season, Jurickson Profar going from a player who for 10 years has been barely able to stay in the league and turned into a genuine, really great batter. Absolutely. And then not to mention they did all this after losing Peter Seidler, who seemed like he was as in love with the game and as in tune with making the game better as any owner in the sport. Not to mention the reports about how he was trying to lead a little bit of a brigade to stop the A's from doing what they were doing, basically, more or less. So I do think it was a magical season in a lot of ways. And just because it didn't end that way does not take away from the regular season and what, as a whole, what was great. And this is why I'm telling everybody over and over to try and remember. Now, don't get me wrong, it ended in frustrating fashion, but keep that in mind. It's great. Last thing. Another troll, because this is fun. At RichJH9, once again on the channel, the 100 plus win. Oh, I answered this already, didn't I? Yeah, the randomness of the playoffs. You know what I mean? Would you consider that a choke and whatnot? I'm just saying if you win the division for 15 years straight and the only time you won was in a shortened season. Prior to this year, don't yell at me. I can't call them chokers anymore, like it's done. But prior to this, no, I don't think that it's that bad. You have the payroll of 1,000 Suns. You had the division on lockdown for 15 years. What are they on? 14 of the last 15 years? And then you just had disastrous performances. Guys, you got swept by the Diamondbacks last year. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's just what they were known for, I think, when you talk to baseball fans. So that's just me. But that's basically it, everybody. That's basically it. Absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy. Looking forward to the next time we do one of these. Remember to send your questions either to me on Twitter at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO, or at _Padres. Leave your questions and comments below. We'll be sure to answer them. In terms of the future of this pod, tomorrow, going to be talking with my guy, finally, Miller Thomas of Locked On Diamondbacks, talking about a bunch of things. Some favorite free agents that we have so far, the state of the National League West, whether or not the Dodgers are forming a super team, all sorts of fun stuff. Should be a lot of fun. Look forward to that. We're going to be doing some player reviews this week as well, with Jackson Merrill or potentially Michael King being the next ones that I want to talk about. That should be a lot of fun. And then we're going to start really getting into the free agency profiles and talking into some, not just the top free agents, which I talked about today, I think is Roki Sasaki. We're going to talk about him, maybe talk about some people who know a little bit better about his mechanics and study that stuff overseas and what have you on the show. And then talk about some under the radar free agents, because there's certainly going to be some. You know, Donovan Solano, he was under the radar. Profar, under the radar, right? So we'll talk about those guys. They still matter. But until next time, everybody, stay safe. And of course, stay faithful. My Friar Faithful homies. Take care.